Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto went to Demon Slayer universe. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. They'd barely known him for a day, but even then, they were still so happy he was safe. It really tugged at his heart. Susamara's over there. Naruto pointed. You can help get the injured out of here. They heeded his words and went ahead, avoiding the dismembered animals around them. Kaneo did not follow, however. Instead, the girl had her blade drawn, her eyes vigilant, scanning for any signs of danger in the cave. Naruto's attention returned to Shinobu. Rokuro was still on the floor, shadows whipping about in one last desperate act of survival. Shinobu had entered a peculiar stance, sword held tightly in her hand. She took a breath, readying herself for another attack, an attack that was sure to hit home. Naruto watched her closely, crossing his arms. Something was different about her, he realized. The way she held herself. The confidence in her stance. And the calmness of her breaths. By this alone, he could tell she was leagues above Ozaki and Murata. He trusted she could handle this final act, so he set his sights on the unconscious Mikago. The pain was the first thing she felt when she awoke. Unrelenting and merciless, it radiated through every fiber of her being, pulling her from the darkness that held her close. Her face hurt the most, even as she felt the healing process mending her wounds by the second. Instead of moving, she remained still for a time, just waiting and waiting, until the pain settled into a dull, aching throb. Finally, she opened her eyes, and fear immediately gripped her heart. The cave was damaged, littered with debris. Kamina's lifeless body was a distance away, and Rokuro was on the ground, surrounded by shadows as someone with a sword moved to finish him off. Surely, she was next. Naruto, her prize, her one chance at growing stronger, was also near. He turned to her, kunai in hand. His clothes were coated in blood, the blood of her animals. Even now, they struggled to stand, slowly healing from the damage dealt by the blonde before her. As he turned toward her, flashes of light filled her mind. A vision suddenly befell her, one from a time she no longer remembered. There was fire, heat, smoke, all of it choking her. But someone else was there, holding her, carrying her through the flames. She couldn't see his face, but his eyes were as blue as the sea, his arms strong and sturdy. The world was turning black, the memory fading, but she could still see him smiling, whispering to her. Survive, Mikago. Mikago opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She tilted her head and screamed to the heavens, her voice reverberating through the hollow cave. Suddenly, she could see nothing. She could hear nothing. But she could feel everything. Everything that her animals felt. Then the injured creatures around her began to move, drawn into the screaming demon. She was almost like a magnet, pulling every one of them into herself. Mikago couldn't predict what would happen to her body after doing this, but she knew the consequences would be grave. Yet, she didn't care. She had to survive. That's all that mattered. Naruto paused at the sight, brows rising. It occurred nearly instantly. One moment, these creatures were on the floor. Then the next, they were all sucked into the female demon, somehow merging with her body. Her features became disfigured, misshapen. And she began to increase in size, taking on the form of multiple animals. She grew and grew until her back touched the ceiling above, sending a shower of massive rocks upon all those that inhabited the cave. After several seconds, she had the appearance of giant, silver wolf, with multiple heads and multiple arms. Mikago's eyes were blank, devoid of reason. She reared her head and roared. It was a horrible sound. A sound that shook the very cave around them. The creature raised a massive paw, bringing it down upon the first person she could find. In carrying arms. Dust covered the cave like a veil, kicking up rocks in the process. Visibility was reduced to nearly zero, and Naruto could hear coughing in the distance, could hear the frightened screams of those still attempting to escape this situation, turned nightmare. Mikago had become a monster, transforming into something that surprised even him. He could see her silhouette within the smog. She thrashed about, slamming into the walls of the cave. With each erratic motion, the underground cavern shuddered, and massive stalactites would fall from the ceiling. Naruto dodged each falling projectile, leaping back to where Shinobu was. "What happened?" she inquired. "I'm not sure," he supplied. "I think she merged with all the animals she normally controls. But this seems different, like a desperate act, a last resort." "I see." Shinobu sheathed her blade, a tint of frustration coloring her gaze. She hadn't gotten a chance to finish Rokuro off, and now, with the added dust and debris, the demon was nowhere to be found. "Are things getting fun now?" he asked, referring to her earlier statemate. Unbidden, Shinobu actually laughed, a soft, genuine sound. Then she turned to the giant creature preparing to bring the whole cave down on their heads. "Maybe a bit too fun." She unsheathed her blade once more, having added more poison. "I can't behead that thing. But maybe with poison, I can kill it, or at least slow it down. There's no guarantee though." "It's worth a try," he agreed. "Still, for now, our #1 priority is getting everyone out of here unharmed." The creature continued to thrash about erratically, moving dangerously close to the hostages, which Susumaru, Ozaki, Murata, and his clone were protecting from falling rocks. Looking at things now, it seemed that many of them were injured and would need to be carried out of the cave. "And how do you suppose we do that?" Shinobu questioned. Naruto said nothing, forming his signature hand sign. Inwardly, he grimaced. He'd already used far more chakra than he wanted to today, and he could feel the strain on his body. But he shoved that concern aside, drawing upon his internal energy for another offensive. 6 shadow clones popped into existence beside him, shocking Shinobu. Her normally calm demeanor was shaken as she looked on with a mixture of alarm and suspicion. By now, the cave was beginning to tremble, and giant cracks formed along the walls, sending another shower of rocks tumbling from above. Naruto and Shinobu dodged the hail of stone, deftly ducking and weaving between each obstacle. Without a word, his clones moved forward, rushing past the unstable, senseless Mikago. Each clone grabbed 2 hostages, and everyone began to run, just as a large section of the cave collapsed, sending another cloud of dust their way. Mikago turned in the direction of the fleeing people, senseless rage in her slitted eyes. Even though she was large, she moved quite quickly, clearing the distance between them in one bound. Shinobu turned to her student, pinning her with a hard stare. "Get away from here, Kaneo." She raised her voice for the first time. And though her student hesitated for an instant, she quickly turned and fled, following after Naruto's clones as they carried the people to safety. Susumaru, Ozaki, and Murata also rushed past them, each of them carrying someone as well. They did not stop to look back, because they understood the situation, and they trusted that Naruto and Shinobu could handle this final foe. With Mikago bearing down on them, Naruto molded the chakra in his stomach, pouring it into his arms. Shinobu watched as he held up both hands. Gale, palm. A titanic burst of air obeyed his command, erupting outward, striking the massive creature barreling toward them. It slowed her down, but only for a moment, giving everyone time to escape. This left Naruto and Shinobu alone. Recovering from the concussive blast of air, Mikago brought down 2 massive paws, cratering the ground where both of them stood. With superior speed, they avoided the blow, blurring away. Insect breathing. Shinobu leapt forward, shattering the ground beneath her feet. Haori fluttering in the wind, she extended her sword for her most powerful attack. Dance of the bee sting, true flutter. A single thrust. She impacted with Mikago's giant eye, pumping heavy amounts of poison into the demon's iris. The effects were almost instant, dark veins bulging along her crimson sclera. But it wasn't nearly enough to kill a demon this large. Mikago only howled in pain, and 3 smaller dog-like creatures erupted from her body as though molded from clay, swiping at Shinobu midair. Sensing danger, she kicked off Mikago's eye, retrieving her sword and flipping away before the smaller creatures could shred her to pieces. And like earlier, the animals returned, fusing back into Mikago's giant body. Shinobu grimaced as she fell, wary of the stalagmites protruding below her. It was sure to be a painful landing. However, before she could hit the ground, Shinobu saw Naruto rush toward her position in the air. He leapt forward, grabbed her hand, and pulled her away from the spikes beneath. Then he landed on a wall, literally sticking to the vertical surface. Shinobu looked up. Once more, she was alarmed by the strange abilities this human, was he even human, possessed. Still, she gripped his hand tightly as both of them gazed at the creature that seemed to be losing its mind by the second, roaring and trashing about. I don't think it can control itself, Shinobu speculated. Yeah, seems that way. Naruto lowered his gaze. What about your poison, is it working? Dangling by his hand, she shook her head. I'm not sure. Normally it would, but I think its body's so large that I need gallons and gallons to actually kill it. Is this really a lower moon? Shinobu thought, having seen the number present on her eye. Then we'll use a different strategy, Naruto said. Another one of your techniques, cried Shinobu. Naruto nodded once. He prepared his mind and body for his next move. But then, his eyes widened, sharp gaze snapping to an area Mikago had already destroyed. Did you hear that? He asked. She arched a slender brow. What? Just then, Mikago's paw came careening into the wall. Naruto quickly pulled Shinobu up, wrapping an arm around her waist. He tensed, shooting forward as a massive, clawed hand crashed into another section of the cave, destroying more and more of the ceiling. Still soaring through the air, Naruto had aimed his jump toward the area the hostages had been held. Now I see, said Shinobu, realizing what he had been trying to tell her. Finally, they landed, and Naruto released his hold around her. In front of them was a crying child, his foot buried under rocks. He looked at them fearfully, glancing at the giant monster that was growling and ramming its head into the surrounding walls. Naruto frowned. The kid must have been left behind, hidden by the thick dust around them while everyone else managed to escape. It's okay, sweetie, Shinobu cooed, getting on one knee. She smiled brightly, and this one actually seemed genuine. You're safe now. We won't let anything happen to you. That's right, kid. Naruto tousled his dark hair, then stooped down and lifted the massive rock pinning him under. The boy immediately latched onto Shinobu, burying his head in her shoulder. She held him tight, glancing at Naruto. The blonde looked forward, chakra already spiking. Go on ahead. Get him to safety. I'll be right behind you. Despite her growing suspicion of him and his strange, demon-like abilities, Shinobu still shook her head. Her features were calm, but the tiniest hint of a frown marred her pristine visage. You know, I can't just leave you. Let's both get out of here first, then I'll figure something out. Why, you worried about me? He teased, smiling as her slight frown deepened. I'll be fine, Miss Kocho. You have to take care of him. You've seen what I can do. If anyone can survive this, it's me. More rocks began to fall from above. Shinobu felt the child in her arms shaking with terror. Naruto was right. The boy's safety was paramount. So, she conceded. Fine. Muscles strengthened by the air around her, Shinobu readied herself to sprint away before the cave came crashing down. She turned to him once more, smirking. You better be right behind me. He only nodded, that same grin finding its way back to his handsome features. Shinobu's legs tensed, she held the child closer. Close your eyes, little one. The boy complied, shutting his eyes as she finally sped off, becoming a blur in the darkened cave. She escaped Mikago's hulking body before the demon could even react, crossing the 100 meters between them in a blink. Shinobu could only hear the sound of wind as she ran, the world narrowing into a dark tunnel. Behind her, Naruto stretched out his hand one more time. He diverted some chakra from the clones still at the clinic, just for a few seconds. The Rasengan swelled to life above his palm, growing, and growing, and growing until it was large enough to illuminate a darkened portion of the cave. "The portal, Naruto," Kurama warned. I know." Mikago turned to him, transfixed on the giant orb he held. Naruto leapt forward. He tore through the air, Otama Rasengan in hand. Time seemed to slow down. And just before he made contact with her, something emerged from Mikago's body, bursting forward like a rocket. Another animal, a smaller wolf. It soared toward him, jaws open. Already in the air, he could do little to change his trajectory, and the creature sailed just below him, sharp teeth sinking into Naruto's leg before letting go and falling downward, obscured by dust and falling rocks. Naruto hissed, but ignored the creature. Instead, he focused on driving the Rasengan into Mikago, with the intent of burying her in this collapsing cave. A massive explosion signaled Naruto's technique. Shinobu resisted the urge to glance back, to see if he truly was behind her, even as the interior cave began to collapse, a shockwave of air shaking the structure to its core. She held the boy, gently stroking his hair as she moved, feet pounding into the ground as the tunnel ahead began to widen, confirming the exit was near. One final push, and she was out, greeted by falling rain and flashing lightning. Shinobu slowed to a halt, skidding across the grassy field. In seconds, she was soaked, water dripping down her onyx hair, seeping past her haori and into her uniform. Still holding the child, she looked around. Naruto's copies were still around, and the people taken captive were safe. They watched with bated breath, feeling tremors as the cave collapsed in on itself, a putrid cloud of dark dust rising from the entrance. Silence reigned. Someone moved forward. A woman with orange-tinted black hair. Ozaki and Murata moved as well, following after her. They lingered near the cave, waiting and waiting. The woman had fangs and claws. There was also a deep wound on her forehead, Shinobu noticed. And it was already healing, hissing with steam. Unconsciously, her hand found the hilt of her sword. When Ozaki and Murata had told her that they were working with a demon, of all things, Shinobu did not know what to think. In fact, she had brushed it aside, opting to first find the 3 lower moons, before even considering that bizarre detail. And yet, that bizarre detail was standing right in front of her. Here, now, as Demon Slayer, Shinobu had an obligation to end this thing's life. And afterward, she would give Ozaki and Murata a stern talk, one that detailed just how dangerous what they were doing, standing near a demon, was. I have to go find him, Susumaru decided. Wait, Murata advised. It looks like more of the cave could still collapse. Susumaru shrugged. I'm a demon. I won't die even if I'm hurt, so don't worry. As she took a step, a sudden blast of wind shot from the entrance of the cave, banishing the dust, and even the rain, around them. Shinobu watched with calm, controlled fascination as the blond man finally emerged. His clothes were torn, ripped in certain areas. A trail of blood dripped down his leg, a bite mark near his calf muscle. Other than that, he was unharmed, if a bit tired. He still smiled though, tugging the demon, Rokuro, by the collar. Naruto unceremoniously dumped Lower Moon 2 onto the grass, then turned to face Shinobu. Looks like you get another chance, Miss Kocho, Naruto said, grinning. He's all yours. I have only one request of you, boy. Naruto arched a single brow. The rain continued to fall, soaking him in seconds. He didn't mind, though, as he looked on with a curious gaze. Before him, Rokuro was on his knees, arms severed once again, the seals around his body restraining the demon completely. And what would that be? Naruto asked. Shinobu had since relinquished the child they saved, placing him in Kaneo's arms, and now, she entered a solid stance, drawing her thin blade from its sheath, ready to put Lower Moon 2 down for good. My request, Rokuro said, is that you remember me even after my death. The blonde doctor shrugged. They won't be fond memories, you know. That's perfectly fine, Rokuro continued, death looming over his head. At this point, it was impossible to escape. Not only was he surrounded by demon slayers, but he was also within the range of Naruto, the one who had utterly defeated him and his comrades. I only wish for someone to know that I lived, that I existed. No one else will. Not my fellow demons, and certainly not him. So please, I beg of you, acknowledge my time spent here on Earth, if only for 1 second after my death. Shinobu shot forward, her blade plunging into his chest. Rokuro did not attempt to use his shadows, nor did he flinch as that thin sword punctured his heart. He accepted his fate as her most potent poison flooded his body, destroying him from the inside out. Seconds later, he was on the floor, twitching and spasming as life slowly, but surely, left his body. He stared upward for a time, the rain trailing down his face, until the light of existence left his gaze, and all was silent and still. Until a crack of thunder shattered the sudden quiet. Susumaru leapt at Naruto, a spontaneous act, and wrapped her arms around him. His eyes widened momentarily, before he relaxed into her touch. Like him, she was soaked, drops of water trailing down her orange-tinted hair. She stayed this way for a time, just holding him, before reality seemed to snap Susumaru from her trance-like state. A blush colored her pale cheeks, she quickly pulled away, rubbing her neck in embarrassment. What was that for? Naruto asked, smiling. Susumaru looked away, clearing her throat. Nothing. Just glad that you're okay. I see. In that case, I'm sorry for scaring you, Naruto replied. He turned to Yuichiro, who had also moved to stand by his side. The teen shivered in the rain, but he seemed rather happy, considering all that had recently transpired. Naruto tousled his turquoise locks, smile widening. And again, I'm sorry that you went through this mess. I should have done more to keep you safe. Yuichiro brushed his apology off, gazing up at the person he considered an older brother. I already told you that it's okay. A rare grin etched across his gentle features. But yeah, you should have done more to keep me safe. If I died, the whole clinic would be out of business within a week. Naruto laughed. You're right. I can't risk losing you if I want the place to stay functional for more than a day. Despite the rain, he pulled both Yuichiro and Susumaru into a hug, an arm around either of their shoulders. They did nothing to resist his hold, both of them looking up at him with bright, happy eyes. It was a peaceful moment, all things considered, interrupted only by one person. Shinobu watched with her head tilted. She retracted her sword from Rokuro's corpse, flicking the blade and sending a splatter of blood onto the grass, where it was soon washed away by the rain. She turned to the trio, eyes calm, and a beautiful smile on her lips. Dr. Uzumaki, Shinobu called in a soothing tone. Naruto looked up, letting his two companions go. He took a protective step forward and stood in front of Susumaru. Yes, Miss Kocho. Shinobu lifted a hand, pointing a single finger in their direction. Towards Susumaru. Are you aware that there's a demon standing right behind you? His eyes narrowed, and he took another step, putting himself between the Hashira and his friends. I'm well aware, he replied. I assumed Ozaki and Murata informed you of this fact. She nodded with smile. Yes. They did. But I was too occupied with the situation at hand to pay much attention to this little detail. Ozaki and Murata shared a nervous glance, looking between Naruto and the insect Hashira. A tension had arisen between them, one that was almost palpable, one that they didn't dare infringe upon, not even with their words. Shinobu looked Naruto in the eyes. He did not flinch, even as she masterfully twirled her sword and pointed it in his direction. You must know this by now, Dr. Uzumaki, the woman continued. I am a demon slayer. So are these three. As such, we have dedicated our lives, our very bodies, to the cause of eradicating every demon from the face of this country. We train endlessly, take on dangerous missions, and sacrifice everything in order to achieve this goal." Shinobu's eyes flickered toward Susumaru, an imperceptible anger burning in those purple orbs. "Thus, as a member of the Demon Slayer Corps, it is my sworn duty to execute creatures just like her." Shinobu blurred forward without warning, thundering toward them. "Not again," Naruto internally groaned. They clashed, sparks flying despite the water falling from the sky. "Oh my," said Shinobu. Naruto had instantly pulled out a kunai, parrying her thrust as it came careening his way. A moment passed. She pulled back, then began anew. Her thrusts came quicker than ever, piercing through the air. She was fast, he'd admit. Faster than anyone he'd encountered in this world. But to him, that simply did not matter. Time slowed to a crawl. And he could see it. Her blade moved forward, parting the rain as it came dangerously close to his face. The glint of steel filled his vision, and he dodged, weaving past a flurry of well-aimed blows. She stabbed upward, downward, then toward the left, then the right. But the results were the same. Naruto avoided every thrust with ease, kunai rising to deflect her final attack. A clang of steel against steel echoed around them. All this while, he had not moved from the place he stood. Shinobu noticed this, her eyes sparking with a hint of awe. Finally, he moved forward, planting a kick to her chest. Her face scrunched up momentarily, before she was sent flying, skidding to a halt as she plunged her sword into the earth, slowing her momentum. Kaneo quickly leapt to her mentor's side, only after placing the child she held somewhere safe. The teen drew her sword, blank gaze landing on Naruto. Having the wind knocked out of you was no fun. Shinobu grimaced as she stood, sucking a sharp breath in an attempt to dull the pain that now burned at her chest. Kaneo took a step forward, prepared to do battle, but Shinobu stopped her, grabbing the teen by the wrist. Then the Hashira stood up. She glanced toward the blonde that had kicked her 20 meters away, a small frown marring his handsome features. "It's all right, Kaneo," Shinobu said, loud enough for all to hear. "Put your blade away. We can't beat him." Kaneo seemed conflicted, her resolve wavering, until she complied and removed her sword from view. The Hashira also sheathed her blade, that same smile returning to her face. She held up both hands and chuckled. "Seems like I can't win this one, huh?" she confessed, walking toward them once again. Naruto still stood protectively in front of Susumaru, kunai in hand. "I concede, okay. I won't try to attack again." Naruto didn't let his guard down, but the tension in the air began to lighten. "Just when I thought we started to see eye to eye, you attack me. That's unfortunate, Miss Kocho." He rubbed his wet blonde hair. "Ah. But honestly, I can't say I'm surprised. These two over here," he inclined his head toward Ozaki and Murata, "tried exactly what you just did yesterday. Must be a demon slayer thing. Hit first, ask questions later." Ozaki and Murata both looked away, shuffling with embarrassment. "Oh. Did they?" Shinobu inquired. "I would hope they did, since not killing a demon on sight is against core rules." She crossed her arms. "But even worse than that is the fact that they were willing to vouch for a demon." She looked over to Ozaki and Murata, pinning them with those calm purple orbs. "This act stands against everything we do as demon slayers. You two understand just how serious this is, correct?" Murata dipped his head, and Ozaki said, "Yes, Lady Kocho. We're aware." Shinobu nodded slowly. "And you're also aware that you can be relieved of duty for this, in which your uniforms will be taken, and your swords confiscated?" Murata swallowed, slowly lowered his head. "Yes, ma'am." The Hashira continued. She moved to stand in front of the two younger slayers. "Are you ready to stake all that training, all those years spent becoming a demon slayer on what you told me earlier?" she questioned. Are you willing to throw it all away to protect that demon? Both of them nodded, despite the potential consequences their actions would bring. Ozaki glanced at Susumaru, then returned her gaze to Shinobu. I'm not totally convinced myself, but the fact still remains, Lady Kocho. She has done nothing to indicate she behaves like typical demons. Ozaki took a shuddering breath, as though fearful to let go of all the hatred that had built up within her for so many years. When we arrived in Tokyo, she was the first demon we found. So, naturally, we went after her. She hadn't done anything to us, but we attacked without warning or mercy. Still, she did not lift a finger against us. She never fought back. She even protected us when the lower moons attacked, despite the fact that we had hurt her the day before. Ozaki turned to Susumaru. And even though we were injured and bleeding, she made no attempts to attack us. Naruto looked at Susumaru fondly. She was somewhat surprised the Demon Slayer duo were actually standing up for her. Shinobu nodded slowly, still not convinced, but she left Ozaki and Murata alone. She turned to Naruto once more. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you some kind of demon as well?" Naruto almost rolled his eyes, recalling when the pair of demon slayers thought the same thing a night ago. "He's not." Murata blurted, then winced, holding onto his bandaged side. "We thought the same when we first met him, but he proved to us that he isn't a demon, that he's human, by standing in the sun." "Is that so?" Shinobu inquired. She smiled sweetly. "If you are in fact human, then how can you do the things that I witnessed in the cave? Making copies of yourself. Standing on vertical surfaces. Restraining high-level demons with a slip of paper. Could you explain?" She was wary, but also curious. Genuinely interested in him and his unnatural abilities. "My anatomy deviates from yours in subtle, yet impactful ways," he explained, referring to his chakra circulatory system, something almost indistinguishable from the cardiovascular system. "I'm a bit different from normal humans, but I'm not a demon." "Different, you say?" Shinobu repeated. She stroked her chin, considering his words. "Unfortunately, I'm still not sure I believe you." "Why not?" Naruto asked. He wasn't angry. Just curiously. After all, Ozaki and Murata had affirmed his state-mates. "That wound on your leg." She pointed downward. "It looked far worse a minute ago." "That's also another one of my abilities." Shinobu moved closer, eyeing him. His face. His body. Her sharp gaze trailed along his physique, intrigued by the human standing before her. "In that case, are you willing to prove that you aren't a demon?" she asked. Not to be outplayed, he too moved closer, until he loomed over her tiny form. "Sure. What do you want me to do, stand out in the sun?" The Hashira shook her head. "No. That won't be necessary." She gripped the hilt of her katana. "Allow me to inject you with my poison. That's the only way I'll be convinced. And no worries. Even high doses are harmless to humans." She demonstrated this fact by slicing her forearm with the weapon, the subtle tint of purple poison painting her wound. Yuichiro began to protest, but Naruto waved him off. "Fine, Miss Kocho. But only on one condition." She fluttered her lengthy eyelashes, looking up at him with that ever-present smile. "What sort of condition?" "You have to ensure that Ozaki and Murata won't be punished." Naruto crossed his arms. "They acted bravely today, put themselves in harm's way to protect civilians. It would be unfair for their reputation to be tarnished, simply because they broke one silly rule." "Dr. Uzumaki," cried Shinobu, feigning alarm. "I do believe you've garnered some misconceptions about me. Dishonesty is not a part of who I am. I will look at the facts objectively and deliver an honesty report when I return to headquarters." Naruto's shoulders eased of their tension. "All right, then. Go ahead." "Your hand, please," she implored. Everyone watched closely as he stretched out his hand. Shinobu took it and was surprised by how warm he felt, despite the pouring rain. "I'll be gentle." Shinobu unsheathed her sword and lowered his arm. She carefully stabbed the center of his palm, puncturing his skin, letting not only the poison in, but his crimson blood out, where it flowed and fell to the ground. Several seconds passed. Naruto didn't start convulsing on the ground, nor did he show any signs of discomfort. Shinobu's smile widened. She retracted her blade and placed it into her white scabbard. "Well, I was totally wrong," Shinobu exclaimed, closing her eyes as she smiled. "Looks like you really aren't a demon, after all." She glanced at Ozaki and Murata. "And if these two are also convinced about this demon, I'm sure there's some truth concerning their claims about her." "So you believe what we told you?" asked Murata. She smiled softly. No. I never said I believe it. I still need some evidence, especially when I report back to headquarters. Unfortunately, I can't tell a lie, or alter details, so I'll have to include everything that occurred, as well as your involvement with her. And your involvement with Dr. Uzumaki, as well. Which meant they could still be severely punished. Ozaki tremored at the thought, and not just because of the rain. She glanced at Murata, who seemed firm in his conviction concerning Naruto and Susumaru. She found her strength renewed by his strong gaze, so she nodded in response to the Hashira's words. "We understand, Lady Kocho." Ozaki dipped her head in respect. "Good," Shinobu said cheerfully. She let go of Naruto's hand before proceeding to tear off a piece of her insect-patterned haori. Naruto arched a brow as she grasped his hand once more, wrapping the white fabric tightly around his injured palm. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The bleeding would have stopped in a few minutes." Shinobu shrugged. She finished tying her improvised bandage, gently squeezing his hand as she finally let go. "As a healer, letting injuries go untreated, especially one that I inflicted, doesn't sit right with me. I'm sure you feel the same way as well." In a way, he did, recalling when he had treated Ozaki and Murata after their initial skirmish. Shinobu looked around. The rain wasn't as harsh as before, but it still persisted, tiny drops of water pelting her skin. The hostages were huddled under a tree, overseen by Naruto's ever-present copies. Shinobu almost laughed. Truly, she stood no chance against him in a real battle. And neither did the lower moons, it seemed. "May I speak with you privately?" the Hashira implored. Naruto thought for a moment, then nodded. He left with her, assuring Yuichiro and Susumaru that he would be fine. At the moment, they did not seem particularly fond of Shinobu. Kaneo also tried to follow, but Shinobu waved her away. "Don't worry. We're just going to talk." A flicker of emotion bloomed in the teen's blank gaze, but she only nodded and remained where she was. Shinobu didn't take him far, only to the entrance of the collapsed cave, still smoldering as dust continued to flow from the inside. "Firstly, allow me to apologize for attacking you," the Hashira said genuinely. "If I'm to be completely honest, part of my reason for such actions was to appraise your combat ability." "You demon slayers are all strange," Naruto remarked, then tilted his head. "How do you rate me, then?" She smirked playfully. "Not very high." And Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. Shinobu moved closer. She peered into the collapsed cave. "What happened to that demon?" she inquired. "I attacked her with a technique that brought the entire cave crashing on her head," he explained. "I also sealed the entrance. There were no other exits in the cave, so she's trapped in there." The Hashira inspected the entrance of the cave, sharp eyes roaming over the massive rocks that had been purposefully collapsed, effectively covering both entry and exit. After several minutes of observation, she finally nodded, convinced by his explanation. Naruto eyed her closely. "What will you do now?" "I'm returning to the city," Shinobu revealed. "In case there's another demon attack, I need to be there to help. Both of them left the entrance of the cave. They then paused when they saw the people that had been put through this frightening ordeal. Some of them were injured, and his clones were tending to their wounds, inspecting those who were worse off. Naruto frowned. He'd rather them get medical attention in a cleaner setting. So you're a doctor? Shinobu glanced his way. A great one at that, I hear. He looked rather sheepish. Murata said that, didn't he? Yes. She nodded with a smile. He didn't go into much detail, though, since I was in a rush to find the lower moons at the time. Technically, his path to becoming a doctor was a strange one. He didn't attend school here in this world. But his skills in medicine had been so impressive that Tamayo, a doctor with some influence, had recommended him to be approved by the Japanese Medical Association in Tokyo. After a week of study, thanks to numerous shadow clones, he aced all the exams and proved his competency in all forms of medical practice, even ones unheard of in this world. With that settled, he'd have something productive to do while trying to find a way back home. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.